Most bands wanted to sound bigger and more psychedelic in 1968. The Velvet Underground made an album that sounded like a subway train was crashing into a steel factory, and still somehow changed music forever. In 1968, the world was drowning in flower power, peace signs, and psychedelic colors. Then the Velvet Underground released White Light, White Heat, an album that basically sounded like they hated all of that stuff. Today, we're looking at the band's second LP, why it shocked listeners, why Andy Warhol launched the band, and why artists from punk, alternative rock, noise rock, and even indie music are still borrowing ideas from this weird little record almost 60 years later. To understand White Light, White Heat, you have to understand just how weird the Velvet Underground really was. Their debut album, Velvet Underground and Nico, with the big Andy Warhol banana, peelable banana on the cover, didn't sell despite their notoriety through Warhol. It mixed beautiful melodies with songs about drugs, isolation, and the darker corners of urban life. While other bands were singing about love and sunshine, Lou Reed was writing songs that made you feel like you were in a back alley waiting for your dealer to show up at 3 a.m. The band itself was made up of Lou Reed, John Cale, Sterling Morrison, and Maureen Tucker. Now, during the recording of this album, John Cale left the band and was replaced by Doug Yule. Lou Reed brought sharp songwriting and street-level stories. He started out as a contract pop songwriter and then degenerated straight down the elevator shaft. John Cale brought musical chaos. He was a classically trained viola player. He had studied experimental music with John Cage. Sterling Morrison grounded everything with solid guitar work. Sterl was the rocker in the Velvets. And then Maureen Tucker. You didn't see too many female band members then, let alone drummers. She played drums in a way that ignored most rock and roll rules. She often stood up while playing and focused on simple pounding rhythms that sounded hypnotic. And together they created something that was unlike anything else at the time. And then there was Andy Warhol. Now, Andy wasn't just a famous artist. He became the band's manager, mentor, and biggest cheerleader. He introduced them to his creative world, whom was called the Factory, a place filled with artists, musicians, actors, and the famous Warhol superstars that passed through his orbit. This connection gave the band more visibility than they probably would have gotten otherwise. Warhol initially installed the German chanteuse Nico as their lead singer. But by the time White Light, White Heat came out, she had already left. Things were changing by 1968 when this album came out. The relationship with Warhol was fading. The band wanted more control over their creative output. Lou Reed was becoming the dominant creative force. And instead of making their sound easier for people to understand, they decided to make it a whole lot harder. So mission accomplished there. The title track opens up like a car crash with a drum kit. White Light, White Heat is a loud, distorted rocker, fast and aggressive. In many ways, it sounds closer to punk rock than almost all music being made in 1968. The title track is often interpreted as being about amphetamine use. Lou Reed wraps the subject in wild, fast-moving lyrics, while the band creates a rockin' wall of noise and distortion. In 1968, this was shockingly aggressive compared to other stuff that was on the radio at the time. Then comes The Gift. one of my favorite tracks on this album, and one of the strangest songs to ever have been put on a record. John Cale narrates a darkly comic tale about a pining, lovelorn boyfriend who mails himself to his girlfriend in a wooden crate. Spoiler, she opens it with a chainsaw. The music plays in one channel while you hear Cale tell the story in the other channel. So it's an experimental listening experience. Now, if you've never heard Sister Ray, imagine being trapped inside a garage with a band who plays one song for 17 minutes and won't stop. Is arguably Lou Reed's most chaotic guitar performance up to that date. The album's centerpiece, if you will. A 17-minute jam about sex, drugs, violence, and chaos. The band recorded it with minimal overdubs, creating a hypnotic, messy, and influential performance that became a blueprint for punk, garage rock, and noise rock. Today, long experimental tracks are common. Back then, this was like throwing a hand grenade to a room of easy listening records. Similar to their first album, nobody bought this second album. The album barely made any commercial impact at the time. Radio stations weren't exactly lining up to play 17-minute noise anthems. The critics were divided, but they always were with the Velvets. Many listeners simply just didn't know what to make of it. And there's created a strange problem. How can an album be one of the most important albums ever recorded if nobody heard it? The answer came years later. The influence of White Light, White Heat became like a sort of secret handshake to get into the speakeasy. Musicians discovered it. Then those musicians started bands. Then those bands influenced other bands. And suddenly the Velvet Underground's fingerprints were everywhere. Peter Buck of REM once said that every person who bought a Velvet Underground LP back when it came out started a band. The most obvious impact, I think, was on punk. The raw energy, simple structures, aggressive sound, and complete lack of interest in being fashionable became a blueprint. Without the Velvet Underground, it's much harder to imagine bands like the Sex Pistols, the Clash, or the Ramones developing in quite the same way. Then came post-punk. Bands started taking the Velvet's experimental side and pushing it further. You can hear echoes of them in Joy Division, Television, Sonic Youth, Jesus and Mary Chain, and countless other groups. Alternative rock picked up the torch next. REM, the Pixies, and countless college rock bands borrowed pieces of the Velvet Underground's formula. Even grunge owes them a debt. The idea that ugly sounds could become beautiful became one of the central ideas of alternative music. And the influence didn't stop there. Listen to Sonic Youth's Walls of Noise. Listen to Galaxy 500's dreamy minimalism. Listen to the Jesus and Mary Chain's feedback-heavy guitars. The Velvet Underground's DNA is still there. The biggest moment in history isn't when the album is released. It's what happens afterward. Over time, musicians began treating White Light, White Heat almost like a sacred text. It gave artists permission to be noisy, to be strange, to ignore trends, and to make music that would probably confuse people. That's a much bigger gift than a hit single. When most bands were trying to fit into the music business, the Velvet Underground were busy building a secret tunnel underneath it. And out of that tunnel came the best music of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Looking back today, White Light and White Heat feels a lot less like a record and more like a challenge. It made a point in 1968. Music doesn't have to be pretty. That statement helped shape punk, alternative rock, indie music, noise rock, and experimental music for decades afterwards. The album may not have conquered the charts, but it conquered musicians. And sometimes that's the kind of victory that lasts the longest. Now, are you familiar with the Velvet Underground? Had you heard of them beyond Lou Reed or John Cale? Let me know what your favorite Velvet's tracks are in the comments. I'll have some great links for you in the description, so please check those out. If you enjoy my content, please consider liking and subscribing, and feel free to share a video with someone you think may like it. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.